A number that big sounds like a fantasy. It is not. It is arithmetic, and it has happened before, and I am going to walk you through exactly why the figure in the title of this video is not a wild guess, but a real defensible case. Not a promise. Not a prediction of the day or the year, a case. And the whole thing rests on one idea the financial channels will not sit still long enough to explain to you. Here is that idea, stated plainly, right at the top, so you are not waiting for it. The biggest moves in the price of gold have never come from gold getting more valuable. They have come from the system around it getting rewritten. When the rules of money change, gold does not climb a staircase. It jumps an elevator shaft. And the rules of money are being quietly rewritten right now, in plain sight, by the same institutions that would never dream of telling you so. Let me give you the concrete fact to chew on before we go anywhere else, because it is the anchor for everything that follows. There was a time when the entire developed world agreed to tie its money to a single currency, and to tie that currency to gold at a fixed rate. Every major nation on earth pegged its money to the American dollar, and the dollar, by solemn international treaty, was redeemable in gold. That was the deal. That was the architecture the modern world was built on after the war. And then, one day, the men in charge simply walked away from it. They tore up the agreement, and the price of gold, which had been frozen by decree for a generation, was set loose. That system had a name. It was hammered out at a resort in the mountains of New Hampshire, and for a quarter of a century, it was the plumbing beneath every paycheck, every pension, every savings account in the Western world. The promise was simple, and it felt permanent. Your dollar was as good as gold because a foreign government could hand back its dollars and receive gold in return. That promise is what gave the dollar its throne. And here's the part that matters to you and your retirement, so lean in. When that promise was abandoned, gold did not rise a little. Over the decade that followed, it rose to many, many times what it had been fixed at. A generation of savers who had been told gold was a sleepy relic watched it become the single best performing asset any of them would touch in their lifetimes. And the ones who understood what the broken promise meant, the ones who were early, made the easy part of that move. The ones who waited until it was obvious, until it was on the cover of every magazine, arrived for the hard part. That is the pattern. That is the whole video. When the system is rewritten, the number that sounds insane becomes the number on the receipt. Now, in my years around the gold and silver world, I have learned to be honest with you before I get excited with you, so let me put the caveat on the table first. I cannot tell you the day. I am not going to insult you by pretending I know the year or the exact figure, or that any of this is guaranteed, because it is not. Nobody can. This is a case, not a promise, and it is not personal financial advice. What I can do is show you why the setup looks the way it looks, and why the people who move the most money on earth are quietly acting as if they already believe it. So who tore up that first agreement, and why does it keep happening? Follow the incentive. A government that owes more than it can ever comfortably repay has exactly one painless exit, and it is the oldest exit there is. You do not default. Defaulting is loud and it ends careers. Instead, you let the money quietly lose its value, so the debts shrink in real terms while the numbers on the page stay polite. Every currency in history that got buried under its own promises was eventually inflated away rather than honestly defaulted on. It is not a conspiracy. It is the path of least resistance, and it is the reason gold has an enemy. And that pressure has not eased since the mountain resort agreement fell apart. If anything, it has multiplied. The debts owed by the developed world are larger, relative to everything those economies produce, than at almost any peacetime moment in history. Every additional dollar of that burden makes the honest path harder and the quiet path more tempting. When a nation's obligations grow faster than its ability to service them, the pull toward letting the currency soften is not a question of if, but of how gently they can manage it. That is the deep tide underneath all of this, and it does not turn on a headline. It turns over years, which is exactly why the biggest holders are acting years ahead of the crowd. Because here is the thing the big banks and the financial media genuinely do not want you to sit and think about for too long. Gold is the one asset that cannot be printed, cannot be promised into existence, cannot be created with a keystroke on an afternoon whim. It is the referee that keeps score honestly when everyone else is cooking the books. And an honest referee is deeply inconvenient to a system that runs on the ability to create money out of thin air. So the story you are fed is that gold is a nervous, barbarous relic for cranks and doomsday preppers. That story is not an accident. It is the business model. And I want to name something that happened not long ago that tells you the professionals stopped believing that story. For decades, there was a reliable rule in the markets. When the return you could earn on safe government bonds went up, gold went down, because why hold a metal that pays you nothing when a bond will pay you? That rule held for years, and recently it broke. Gold climbed even as those safe returns stayed high. The old inverse relationship simply stopped working. When a rule that held for a generation quietly breaks, it is because something underneath the rule has changed. And what changed is trust. Let me make this personal because this is exactly the moment it stops being a history lesson and starts being about your money. Picture a man I will call Walt. Walt is 66. He did everything the responsible way. He maxed out the retirement account. He did not chase the hot stock. He paid off the house. He raised the kids right. And Walt has a quiet fear he does not say out loud at dinner, which is that the dollars he spent 40 years accumulating are being slowly, deliberately watered down while he sleeps, and that the account statement that looks so healthy today will buy him a fraction of what he thinks it will when he is 80. If that fear lives somewhere in your chest too, I want you to know it is not paranoia. It is pattern recognition. Walt is right to feel it. The question is what he does about it. And that brings me to the first thing I owe you, because this is the point in the video where the stakes are highest, and I would be doing you a disservice to keep it to myself. While regular savers are being told gold is a relic, the central banks, the very institutions that print the currencies, have been buying gold at a record pace. Not a little. For 3 straight years, the world's central banks bought more than 1,000 tons of gold a year, roughly double what they had been buying the decade before. And gold has now quietly passed every other reserve asset except the American dollar itself, to become the second most held reserve on Earth. The people who run the printing presses are trading their own paper for metal, hand over fist. Ask yourself why. Here is the part almost nobody tells retirees. You are allowed to do the exact same thing they are doing legally, inside the retirement account you already have. There is a provision that lets an ordinary American move a portion of savings out of paper and into physical gold and silver held in a real vault in your name without taxes and without penalties, because it is a transfer and not a withdrawal. Most people have never heard of it, which is not an accident either. I put together a free guide that walks through exactly how it works, in plain English. If you are watching this on your television, just scan the QR code on your screen. If you are on your phone or your computer, go to jeffreedguide.com. And this is not just for insiders or the wealthy. If you have $100,000 or more in any retirement account, an IRA, a 401k, a workplace plan from an old employer, this is for you. That is the whole point of the guide. Now let me get back to why the rules are changing, because the reason is bigger than most people realize. Go back to that mountain resort agreement for a second, because there is a chapter that never makes the highlight reel. Before the whole thing collapsed, there was a desperate attempt to save it. 8 nations pooled their gold reserves and spent them into the market, day after day, trying to hold the fixed price by brute force, selling their own gold to convince the world the promise was still good. And it worked, right up until it didn't. One by one, they ran out of conviction, and then they ran out of gold, and then they simply stopped and let the price go. I have seen this movie before, and here's how it tends to go. The authorities defend the old number long past the point of sense, because admitting the number is wrong is admitting the whole system is under strain. They defend it until they cannot, and the day they stop defending it is the day the real move begins. And there is a second lesson buried in that story that goes right to the heart of the enemy. There is a difference, an enormous difference between gold you can hold and a promise to deliver gold. The nations pooling their reserves learned it. The savers of that era learned it. On the paper markets where the price is set today, there are many, many claims to each actual ounce sitting in a vault. It is a game of musical chairs where almost everyone is promised a chair and only a few chairs exist. As long as nobody insists on sitting down, the music plays and the price behaves. But the entire history of gold is the history of moments when a lot of people suddenly insist on sitting down at once, and there are not enough chairs, and the price of a real chair goes vertical. That is why what you own matters as much as whether you own it. A promise can be frozen, defaulted, revalued, or simply broken. Metal in a vault cannot. Now let me connect this to something even the professionals underestimated, and it is the freshest reason the buying has accelerated. Not long ago, one major power discovered that a large chunk of its foreign reserves, money it thought was safely parked in the global banking system, could be frozen with the stroke of a pen. Whatever you think of the politics, and I am not here for the politics, every finance minister and central banker on the planet watched that happen and drew the same private conclusion. Reserves you hold as somebody else's promise can be switched off. Reserves you hold as gold in your own vault cannot. That single realization is a large part of why the record buying is record buying. The people closest to the machinery decided they wanted something no one could freeze. That should tell you something about what they actually trust. And here is where it gets strange, because you would think all of this would be front-page news, screamed from every financial channel. It is not. And that is not because it is a secret. It is because it is boring to the people who profit from your attention being elsewhere. The trading desks make their money on your churning in and out. The financial media makes its money on the next shiny thing. A slow, structural, generational shift in what the world uses to store value does not sell advertising this quarter. So it gets a paragraph on page 11 while the professionals quietly position. That gap between what the smart money is doing and what you are being told is the single most valuable thing I can point you toward. Let me address the objection I know some of you are forming, because I respect you too much to skip it. You are thinking, fine, but gold does not just go up. It falls too, sometimes hard. And you are absolutely right, it does. Even in the greatest bull markets in gold's history, there were savage pullbacks along the way, drops that cut the price dramatically in the middle of the run, drops so brutal that people convinced themselves the whole thing was over, right before it went on to multiply many times from there. I have watched this exact setup play out more than once. The metal shakes people off. There have been episodes where the paper market rules were changed overnight, margins raised, and the price dropped sharply in a matter of days, while nothing about the underlying story changed one bit. Those shakeouts are not the end of the move. They are the toll the move charges to stay on board. And the people who understand that do not sell into them. They are the customers on the other side. So this is the honest shape of the case, and I want you to hold both halves of it. The upside is real, and it is not modest, because it does not depend on gold becoming trendy. It depends on the system being rewritten, and the system is visibly under the kind of strain that has forced rewrites before. Meanwhile, the risk is also real, in the form of sharp, stomach-turning pullbacks along the way that are designed to make you quit at the worst possible moment. Both things are true at once. A big target and a bumpy road are not contradictions. Historically, they are the same story. And that is exactly why how you own it matters more than most people think. If you own the metal itself, held in your name, sized so that a shakeout can never force you to sell at the bottom, then those violent dips are just weather. You wait them out. But if you own a leveraged promise or a paper position you have to defend, or a slice of your net worth so large that a scary drop keeps you awake and makes you capitulate, then the very same asset that should have protected you becomes the thing that breaks you. The metal is not the risk. The structure around how you hold it is the risk. Own the real thing. Own it in a size you can sit with through a storm, and never, ever be a forced seller. That is the whole game. Now here's the part that almost nobody gets to, because it comes at the end and most people have already drifted off. The smart money already sees all of this. The central banks are already positioned, buying at a pace we have not seen in modern history. A handful of nations are already trading their paper for metal as fast as they can. But the mainstream, the pension funds, the financial advisors reading from the same tired script, the neighbor who still thinks gold is for cranks, they have not caught on yet. We are not in the moment where everyone knows, and that is precisely why this matters now. Because by the time it is obvious, by the time gold leads every news segment, and every advisor suddenly recommends it, and it is on the cover of every magazine, the easy part will already be behind us. Nobody sends you an invitation to be early. There is no bell that rings. The invitation is the fact that it still feels quiet. The quiet is the opportunity. So let me leave you with something concrete and honest, and then a way to act on it. This is the calm before the crowd, and the calm is exactly when a decision like this is still cheap and completely reversible and made without panic. That is the window. It closes not when the price moves, but when the fear arrives, and by then the good decisions are expensive and made in a hurry. If you have $100,000 or more in a retirement account and you have watched this far, I would genuinely like to help you think it through. We do a free, no-obligation, one-on-one educational web conference, just for people in that position who watch the whole way, and mention this video. No pressure, no pitch, just a real conversation about your situation and whether any of this fits it. If you are on your television, scan the QR code on your screen. If you are on your phone or your computer, go to jeffreedguide.com. Same place, jeffreedguide.com. Because remember how we started. A number that big sounds like a fantasy right up until the rules of money get rewritten, and then it is just the number on the receipt. The world has torn up the agreement before. It walked away from the promise, and gold went from a fixed, sleepy relic to the best asset of a generation, and the people who were early kept the easy part. Walt, sitting at his kitchen table with that quiet fear in his chest, is not wrong to feel it. He is just early. And being early before the crowd arrives and the invitation that never comes is the only advantage an ordinary saver ever really gets. The system is being rewritten again. The only question is whether you see it before or after everyone else does.